I went to visit my wife's grave and found a boy asleep on top of her tombstone. He called me Dad and told me he missed Mom. I saw a photo at home and made a discovery I never could have imagined. The clock struck 11:40 when Andrew Bennett crossed through the gates of the French cemetery, just as he had done every year on this very date. He didn't pause. He knew exactly where he was going. Clutched in his hand was a bouquet of white lilies, Hannah's favorite flowers. Upon reaching the grave, he froze. The flowers already there were not his. They were fresh gardenias, carefully placed. This unsettled him. No one else visited that grave since Hannah had passed. He took a step closer and then he saw it. A boy, asleep on the tombstone. He looked around, 7 years old, clutching a photograph. Andrew approached cautiously. The boy suddenly woke up with a start, frightened. He pressed the photo against his chest and pulled back, eyeing Andrew with a mixture of fear and sadness. "Who are you?" Andrew asked, utterly confused. "My name is Lucas," the boy said. "Hannah was my mom." Andrew stepped back, stunned. He didn't know what to say. His body froze in disbelief. "What did you say?" "My mom is sleeping here. I always come to see her," Lucas said, never breaking eye contact. A cemetery worker approached, his face a familiar one. "That boy comes every year just today. He stays for hours. No one knows where he comes from." Still dazed, Andrew took Lucas to the cemetery office. No one recognized him. No one knew how he had arrived. In the confusion, Lucas ran off. All Andrew could do was pick up the photo the boy had dropped. He examined it closely. Hannah was there, smiling, sitting with a baby in her arms. That photo Andrew had never seen before. By nightfall, locked in his study at the house in Polanco, Andrew stared at the image over and over again. It wasn't just the presence of the boy that disturbed him. It was Hannah's gaze. There was tenderness in her eyes, but there was something more, something different. A calmness, a peace he didn't remember ever seeing in her during the last years of their marriage. He wondered how many times they had shared a meal without him noticing this transformation in her. He turned on Hannah's old laptop, still kept among her belongings. It took several attempts before he finally remembered the password. But when he logged in, everything came rushing back. Emails, files, calendar notes, a whole life that she had been managing out of his sight. Among the messages and folders, he began to see a pattern. Recurring mentions of the Luz de Vida orphanage in Iztapalapa. Dates, lists, children's names, acknowledgements. Hannah had spent more time there than he had ever known. The next morning, he drove straight to the orphanage. The heavy traffic in the eastern part of the city didn't distract him for a second. He had the photograph with him, tucked inside a folder. When he arrived, a woman in her 50s greeted him. She introduced herself as Susan, the coordinator. When Andrew showed her the photo, her reaction was immediate. "That boy's Lucas. Of course I know him. He was very close to Hannah. She loved him like a son." Andrew froze. "What do you mean, like a son?" Susan sighed before answering. "Hannah was in the process of adopting him. She had already started the paperwork with us. Everything was going well. But then, well, you know what happened." It was too much. Andrew felt a hole in his stomach. The idea that his wife had been about to completely change their lives, without him ever knowing, was shattering. Susan continued. "After Hannah passed, Lucas simply disappeared. He ran away. He only comes back that day every year. No one knows where he lives or how he gets by, but he always comes back." Andrew left the orphanage carrying a weight he had never felt before. Perhaps Hannah hadn't just left him with a memory. She had left him with a responsibility, something unfinished. If you're watching this, I'm sure you're liking it, so I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. The next day, Andrew returned to the Luz de Vida orphanage. He hadn't slept well. He had spent the night imagining scenarios, trying to piece together a version of Hannah he could no longer ask about. He needed answers, not just about Lucas, but about who his wife had truly been in those last years. Susan greeted him with the same cordiality, though her expression showed concern upon seeing him so soon. "Can I see the visitor records?" Andrew asked, not beating around the bush. "Anything that helps me understand what she was living here." Susan hesitated for a moment, but agreed. She led him to a small office with worn furniture and the smell of old paper. She placed a file in front of him, with Hannah's full name handwritten on the cover. Inside, alongside the dates of her visits, was something he hadn't expected to find. A small bundle of sealed envelopes with the name Lucas written in Hannah's smooth, clean handwriting. "She asked us to keep them in case he ever came back. I guess now is the time," Susan said before quietly excusing herself. Andrew opened the first letter with trembling hands. Hannah's voice, written in words, hit him immediately. "My little miracle. Every day I spend with you, I am convinced that you are part of my destiny." The following letters were even more profound. They spoke of hope, of a home, of a love that didn't depend on blood, but on the heart. Hannah wrote like a mother, not a volunteer. In every sentence there was a promise, a complete surrender. Andrew couldn't hold back. He cried in silence, feeling like he had been living with a stranger. He had never imagined Hannah writing such things. He had never imagined that her silence concealed so much. A caregiver entered gently and, upon seeing him in this state, commented, "She called him my little miracle." She said God had put him on her path when she felt the most alone. She was about to take him home. Just a few months were left. Andrew lowered his gaze. The emptiness he felt now was much more than just pain. It was guilt. How could he have been so close to her, and yet so far away? When he left the orphanage, still holding the letters, he saw him. A few meters away, among a cluster of trees, stood Lucas, still, watching, as though unsure whether to come closer or not. Andrew took a step toward him, but the boy, noticing him, ran off down the street. Without thinking, Andrew chased after him. He crossed 2 streets before catching up with him in a small plaza nearby. Lucas was sitting on a bench, crying. When he saw Andrew, he covered his face. "She said she would come back. She promised me, and she never did," he sobbed. Andrew knelt in front of him, not knowing what to say. He couldn't correct him. He couldn't promise anything. All he could say was, "Do you want an ice cream?" Lucas hesitated but nodded. For the first time, he didn't run away. Sitting on the curb of a nearby ice cream shop, Andrew watched him in silence. The boy slowly licked his ice cream, still with wet eyes. Then, without looking at him, he asked, "Are you the man in the picture?" Andrew felt his chest tighten. He didn't know how to respond, because in that question there was something deeper, a need to know if he could trust him. After that day at the ice cream shop, something changed. It wasn't immediate, but Andrew began appearing more frequently in Lucas's life. Sometimes he would search for him at the plaza, other times he would find him near the orphanage. He always brought something, a ball, a ham sandwich, an illustrated storybook. At first, Lucas accepted his presence in silence, with distrust, but without rejecting him entirely. He seemed to observe him the way one might observe an injured animal, cautiously, waiting for any sign that would prove Andrew wasn't trustworthy. However, as the days passed, Lucas started staying longer. He asked odd questions, as if testing him. One afternoon, he asked if Andrew knew how to ride a bike without hands. Another time, he asked if Andrew had ever cried while watching cartoons. Andrew answered truthfully, even if it felt ridiculous, even if it hurt. What confused him most were the gestures, Small things, the way Lucas smiled, how he scrunched his nose when concentrating, the way he tilted his head when something caught his interest. These were details Andrew had seen Hannah do hundreds of times, and that disarmed him. One ordinary Tuesday, Lucas pulled a drawing out of his torn backpack. He did it quietly, as though it were something sacred. He carefully spread it out on the table at the park. It was a white sheet with 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a house. Hannah in the middle, Lucas on one side, and Andrew on the other. "And this?" Andrew asked, trying to sound natural. "My family, if you want," the boy said, without lifting his gaze. Andrew didn't know what to say. He felt a lump in his throat. For the first time, the idea of being a father stopped feeling abstract. It wasn't just a role. It was a presence. It was that drawing. Days later, he sat with the director of the orphanage. He wanted to understand, to know if it was possible. The answer was clear: yes, although the process would be long. Psychological evaluations, home visits, interviews, paperwork. Nothing guaranteed. Andrew left with a folder full of requirements in his hand and a whirlwind of thoughts in his mind. What if he couldn't handle it? What if he ruined the boy's life? What if it was too late to try to be something he had never been? The nights began to be restless. He dreamed of Hannah, always in different places: a train station, a house with no windows, a garden at night. She looked at him urgently, as though she wanted to tell him something, but her voice never came out. He would wake up agitated, his heart racing, as though he were running late for something he didn't know. He sought out his therapist. He sat in front of her, shoulders slumped, and talked about Lucas, about Hannah, about the photo, about the letters, about the guilt. She listened without interrupting. "Maybe this boy isn't just a burden," she told him at the end. "Perhaps he's your bridge back, to yourself, to life." Andrew thought about it. What if she was right? But the doubts didn't go away. One afternoon, his trusted lawyer, a serious and direct man, showed up at his house with a proposal. "There's a family that's been waiting for the chance to adopt Lucas. If you're not ready, they are." Andrew agreed to meet them. He didn't want to, but he felt it was something he had to do. The lawyer took him to a private meeting at an elegant restaurant in Las Lomas. Across from him were Lauren and Robert, both impeccably dressed, with practiced smiles and polished manners. She ran a foundation for children with cancer. He was a businessman with a long history of donations and sponsorships. Everything seemed perfect, at least on paper. "We know that Lucas has had a complicated history, but we could offer him stability, opportunities, a life without wants," Lauren said, with a warm but slightly distant tone. Robert nodded, speaking more about the plans they had for him than about Lucas as a person. Andrew listened, but every word sounded hollow to him. There was something about the way they spoke of the boy that bothered him. It was as if he were just another project, another cause. Despite his doubts, Lucas was sent to spend the weekend with them. The orphanage saw it as a necessary step in the process. Andrew helped him pack a small bag, pretending to be calm. He told him everything would be fine, that it would be fun. But as soon as he saw Lucas get into the car with his new potential adoptive parents, he felt a sharp pain in his stomach. Saturday was torture. Andrew could only look at his phone, hoping for news. Nothing. Not a message, not a call. The hours dragged on. He tried to distract himself, but every corner of his house reminded him of Lucas. The ball in the living room, a forgotten drawing in the kitchen, Hannah's voice in his head. Sunday was even worse. By 9 in the morning, he was already outside the orphanage, waiting. Lucas returned around noon. He walked slowly, shoulders slumped. Andrew crouched to greet him, but the boy handed him the bag without saying a word. "How did it go?" Andrew asked softly. Lucas looked at him seriously. The house was big. They had a pool, but it was cold, not like the water, like the air, like everything. Andrew swallowed hard. "And would you like to go back?" Lucas shook his head. Then he looked him straight in the eyes. "Can I stay with you? Mom wanted that. I'm sorry. When you're close, I feel like she's smiling." The words knocked the breath out of him. It was as if his heart broke into 1,000 pieces and then slowly pieced itself back together in a new way. He nodded, unable to speak. On the way back in the car, Lucas fell asleep in the back seat. Andrew watched him in the rear-view mirror, observing how the boy clung to his bag as though it were a shield. A solitary tear rolled down his cheek. There was no turning back now. That night, while searching for an old book of Hannah's, he found a forgotten recording. It was a voice message saved in a folder on her phone. Hannah spoke about love, about the need to give, even when one feels like they can't give anymore. Love isn't something you keep, it's something you give, especially to those who need it most. Hearing her voice felt like receiving a sign. Without another thought, Andrew printed the first adoption forms and signed them. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was doing something truly right. The next morning, as he was preparing coffee, Lucas ran into the kitchen, barefoot and disheveled. He hugged Andrew from behind. "Good morning, Dad." Andrew stood still, his eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not tears of pain. That same week, still shaken by everything that had happened, Andrew went to the DIF office to officially begin the adoption process. It wasn't just a decision made with his heart, it was a concrete action. Forms, certifications, document copies, personal references, everything. He had crossed the line of doubt, but the road ahead wasn't promising to be easy. The interviews began soon after, psychological evaluations, unannounced home visits, individual and joint sessions. Andrew felt exposed, questioned, measured, but he accepted it. He knew it was necessary. During one of those sessions, in a pastel-colored room with low furniture, a social worker asked Lucas what he wished for his future. The boy lowered his head, fiddled with his fingers, and after a brief pause answered, "I want you to let me say, 'real dad' one day without anyone correcting me." The worker swallowed hard, and another took note, their eyes glossy. Andrew couldn't move. Weeks later, Andrew reorganized his house. He had new furniture made, painted a whole room in the colors Lucas had chosen, sky blue and green. Together, they brought in stuffed animals, books, a rocket-shaped lamp. Lucas jumped on the bed even before the sheets were on, laughing as if life was just beginning. Andrew watched him, feeling happy, but also fearful. What if he failed? He spoke with his sister, Jessica, during a quiet dinner at her house. "What if I'm not enough?" he confessed. She took his hand and said, "You already are, Ale. Because you're not doing this out of guilt or to fill a void. You're doing it out of love. Trust in that." But the calm didn't last long. In a meeting with the adoption lawyers, Andrew received unexpected news. A distant aunt of Lucas, who lived in Monterey, had requested custody. She had reasonable conditions, a stable job, a home of her own. She had never shown interest before, but the judge decided to consider her request. The hearing was scheduled in 2 weeks. When Lucas overheard the conversation by accident, he panicked. He screamed, cried, and threw his backpack on the floor. "I don't want to go. She's not my family. You're my family, you and Mom." Andrew tried to calm him down, but the boy was beside himself. That night, Lucas wet the bed for the first time since he had been living with Andrew. Andrew said nothing. He hugged him, changed him, cleaned everything up without making him feel guilty. And it was in that moment, with the boy asleep in his arms, that Andrew understood. What Lucas was carrying wasn't just abandonment, it was deep fear, a fear that came from years of loneliness. The next day, without thinking too much about it, Andrew took a few days off from work. He packed 2 suitcases and took Lucas to Tulum. They needed air, distance, space to breathe. The first afternoon on the beach, Lucas built a sandcastle with towers and a wall, and then, without looking at Andrew, he said, "This is going to be our house, yours, mine, and Mom's, because she lives here too, in the wind." Andrew sat beside him, unable to speak. He swallowed hard, and inside he cried like he hadn't cried since losing her. But that peace, as fragile as sand slipping between fingers, crumbled as soon as they returned to Mexico City. As soon as they got out of the car in front of the house in Polanco, Andrew noticed the chaos: cameras, microphones, reporters pushing each other. The door to his house was blocked by flashes and questions shouted from all directions. One reporter, with a cynical smile, raised his voice above the rest. "Mr. Bennett, is it true that you're using the boy to clean up your image?" Andrew didn't understand what was happening. His lawyer called him immediately. "There's an article out this morning in a tabloid. They're painting you as a guilty businessman who wants to adopt an orphan to wash his conscience. It's already gone viral." In just a few hours, his name was all over social media. Some defended him, many others accused him. Opinion columns, memes, speculations. Andrew had to lock Lucas in the back of the house, away from the windows, while the police struggled to remove the media. The DIF came under public pressure. The judge in charge of the case ordered an urgent new hearing to review the boy's environment. Andrew's lawyer was clear: don't give interviews, don't respond, stay away from it all. Andrew obeyed, but inside he was seething with anger. Not for himself, for Lucas. One night, while they were having dinner in silence, Lucas looked up from his plate and asked, "Are you going to give up on me?" The question hit Andrew like a bullet to the soul. "No, my love, never," Andrew said, placing a hand on his. "No matter what happens, I'm here, and I'm staying." That night, Lucas asked to sleep in his bed. Andrew held him until he fell asleep. The next morning, driven by the anxiety of leaving no loose ends, Andrew flew to Monterrey. He sought out Lucas's biological aunt. He found her in a modest house with an uneasy look. "Did you know Lucas?" he asked directly. The woman hesitated. "No, never. I was just called. They offered me financial help if I started the process. People I don't know well. They just said you weren't a good option because of your public life." Andrew felt heat rise in his face. It was pure anger. Not for himself, but for the boy. For the dirty use of his life for a selfish purpose. He returned to the capital and, with his lawyer, gathered evidence, recordings, messages, names. Everything was delivered to the judge in a sealed folder. In the hearing, the judge, calm and measured, confronted the woman. She couldn't sustain the lie for long. Finally, she withdrew the legal process. She publicly declared that she had no real intention of raising the child. Andrew took his first deep breath in weeks. When they left the courtroom, Lucas, dressed in a white shirt and his hair neatly combed, grabbed his hand tightly. He didn't say much. He just looked up and whispered, "Am I just yours now?" Andrew hugged him without saying a word, then replied, "You always were." With the legal storm finally behind them, life began to take a new rhythm for Andrew and Lucas. The boy was enrolled in a bilingual school in Coyoacan, a humanistic institution with spacious areas surrounded by trees. Lucas was excited from the moment he saw the art classrooms and the school garden. For days, he couldn't stop talking about it. But the first day of school was hard. When they arrived at the gate, Lucas clung tightly to Andrew's arm. "Are you going to leave?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I'll be here when you get out, just like I promised," Andrew replied, kneeling down in front of him. The boy nodded, holding back tears. Still, when the teacher took his hand, he broke down in sobs. Andrew stayed outside for several minutes, staring at the gate, his heart shattered. But he kept his promise. He was there when school was over, and Lucas ran to him, beaming. "I have a classmate named after a superhero, and the teacher speaks better English than the TV." he shouted, jumping as he spoke. From then on, they began to create rituals. At night, they would have dinner together, watch old movies. Hannah had an enormous collection of classic films, and before bed, they would read one of her letters. Andrew had kept them all. They were part of the soul of this new family. One afternoon, while they were playing hide and seek inside the house, Lucas found a wooden box under the piano. He opened it and found letters, drawings, perfumes, a travel notebook, and a USB drive with a label that read, "For when I'm no longer here." They plugged it into the living room TV. The video showed Hannah sitting in the garden, her hair down, a serene smile on her face. She spoke about Lucas, how happy he made her, the love she felt for Andrew, and her desire to see them together, building something new. If you're watching this, it's because fate has done what I always sensed. You're together. Please, love each other so much. Be what I dreamed. They both cried in silence. Lucas curled up against Andrew's chest, who held him tightly, feeling that Hannah was there in that exact moment. Over time, Andrew started showing Lucas old photos of when he and Hannah first met, of trips, of birthdays. The boy looked at them with near devotional attention. He learned the names of their friends, the places, the stories behind each image. And something changed in Andrew as well. The chronic sadness that had followed him for years began to transform, not into forgetfulness, but into movement. He got back into the social projects he once shared with Hannah. This time, Lucas came along. They went to the orphanage together on Saturdays. Lucas helped organize games, brought sweets, and even told his story to the other children with pride. Andrew watched in silence, feeling that in some way Hannah was guiding them. For the first time in years, he woke up without feeling emptiness. He felt gratitude. One night during dinner, Lucas raised his glass of juice with an unexpected seriousness. "I want to make a toast to Mom, who brought us together." Andrew could barely hold his glass. He said nothing. He only looked at him, tears running down his face, nodding. That same night, Andrew's phone rang. It was his lawyer. The voice on the other end sounded different, tense and straightforward. "Andrew, Lucas's biological father has shown up." It felt like a blow to the stomach. Andrew froze, unable to speak. He wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. "Who?" "A man named Kevin Robinson. He has a criminal record, served time in prison, but he has a DNA test that confirms his paternity. He wants to demand custody." The news exploded like a bomb. The next day, the judge called Andrew in for an urgent meeting. In the courtroom, they showed him official documents, sealed papers, a legally valid genetic test. Kevin was there, thin, with poorly done tattoos covering his arms, a scruffy beard and a shifty gaze. He claimed to be sorry, that he had changed, and that he wanted to raise his son. Andrew looked at him, unable to understand what part of the scene was real. Everything he had built with Lucas, everything they had overcome, now hung by a thread because of a man who had never been present, a man who didn't even know the boy. When Lucas found out, it was a disaster. He locked himself in his room, throwing books around, ripping one of his drawings. "I don't want to go with that man. I don't even know who he is." "You're my dad," he screamed, his face red with anger. Andrew knelt in front of him, promising he would do everything possible to protect him, and he did. He hired a private investigator, a former agent known for his discretion. In less than a week, the report was on his desk. Kevin had connections to a small criminal group, a history of abandoning 2 other children in Michoacan, and had only recently been released from prison. His intentions were, to say the least, questionable, but the judge still needed to hear Lucas's voice. The law required consideration of the child's wishes. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was full. Andrew, dressed in a dark gray suit, tried to keep his composure. Lucas, sitting up front, looked at the judge with a furrowed brow. When they asked him to speak, he did so without hesitation. "I don't know him. He didn't take care of me, didn't look for me, didn't love me. My real dad is Andrew. He took care of me when I needed it most, and I choose him." There was silence. No one breathed. Andrew closed his eyes, and when he opened them, the tears were already falling down his cheeks. He couldn't stop them. The judge lowered his gaze to the documents, contained his emotion, and issued a temporary ruling. Kevin's custody was suspended until further court orders. Days later, Kevin disappeared. He stopped answering calls. He didn't show up for subsequent hearings. The investigator, in an informal report, suggested that someone had hired him to disrupt the adoption process. Perhaps he had been used as a pawn, but with no direct proof, there was nothing more they could do. When they left the courthouse, Lucas, dressed in a white shirt and carefully combed hair, grabbed Andrew's hand tightly. He didn't say much. He simply looked up and whispered, "Am I just yours now?" Andrew hugged him without saying a word, then answered, "You always were." A few days later, Andrew received the official notice. The adoption would be finalized on the following Monday. It marked the legal end of a long, exhausting process, but the true beginning of something that had already been built with love. To celebrate, he decided to organize a small ceremony in the garden of the house in Polanco. Nothing extravagant, just close friends, his sister Jessica, the lawyer, the orphanage staff, and of course, Lucas's new school friends. When he told the boy, Lucas was immediately excited. He started making a guest list with absolute seriousness, as if he were organizing an international event. He asked for invitations for the English teacher, Susan from the orphanage, the janitor who had given him candy on a rainy day, and added, in a soft but firm voice, "And I want chocolate cake, just like the one Mum used to make." Andrew nodded without asking more questions. He remembered the recipe written in a notebook Hannah had kept, and he arranged to have it made with all the details. On the day of the ceremony, the garden was decorated with handmade paper garlands and photos of key moments between Andrew and Lucas. A small table with white flowers displayed a framed picture of Hannah, and next to it, a lit candle. During the event, amidst kind words from the guests and proud glances, Andrew took the microphone with trembling hands. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket and slowly opened it. "This letter is for you, Hannah," he said. "There's no way to thank you for what you did. You left me the most valuable gift anyone could imagine. Lucas is light, strength, and everything you were too. You gave us the chance to be a family, and I will never stop honoring that." Several guests discreetly wiped away tears. Lucas let go of his friend's hand, ran toward Andrew, hugged him tightly, and kissed him on the cheek. "I love you, Dad." Andrew's voice broke, but he managed to hold it together. It was a moment that didn't need any extra words, just truth. On Monday, in a brief but symbolic hearing, the judge signed the final documents. Lucas, wearing a white shirt and new jeans, received his new birth certificate. Now he carried the Bennett surname. "What do you think, young man?" the judge asked, smiling. "I'm Lucas Bennett now," the boy shouted, raising the paper in the air. Everyone applauded. Andrew picked him up, spinning him around in the air as they both laughed. There were no photos that could capture this moment. Only the heart could do that. That same day, they went together to the French cemetery. Andrew carried the white lilies and the new birth certificate in a folder. Lucas held a purple flower. When they arrived, he placed the document on the tombstone and knelt. "Now everything is okay, Mom. He found me." Andrew stood quietly for a few minutes. Then he leaned down and whispered, "Thank you, Hannah, for never giving up on us." On the way back home, later in the afternoon, Lucas broke the silence in the car. "Dad, can we adopt a dog?" Andrew laughed wholeheartedly. surprised by the naturalness of the question. "Of course, son, you choose the name." And at that moment, with the city slowly passing by outside the window, the story of two broken lives finally felt, at last, complete. A few days later, the name had already been decided: Buddy, a mixed-breed puppy with big ears and clumsy legs that Lucas had seen in an adoption campaign organized by the same orphanage where he had grown up. There was no discussion. As soon as the puppy jumped on him and licked his face, Lucas said, "This is him," with the certainty of someone recognizing an old friend. From that moment on, Buddy became his inseparable shadow. He slept at his feet, waited at the door after school, and even accompanied him when Andrew read him stories in the living room. With the new routine, the house in Polanco became filled with noise and life. Lucas began to stand out at school, not only for his good grades, but for his attitude. He was participative, curious, always with a smile that was contagious. He was chosen to represent his class in a special presentation about families. The topic excited him more than Andrew had expected. On the day of the presentation, Lucas took the stage with a large poster decorated with photos of Hannah, Andrew, Buddy, and himself. He spoke with a firm voice. "This is my family. My mom, Hannah, takes care of me from heaven. My dad, Andrew, saved my heart. And Buddy makes us laugh every day. It's not a family like the ones in fairy tales. It's better." The teachers couldn't hold back their tears. A parent recorded the moment and shared it on social media. The video went viral in no time. Soon, messages from all over the country started pouring in. A week later, Andrew was invited to give a conference on emotional paternity at a national adoption event. He hesitated, became nervous, and even thought about saying no. But Lucas encouraged him. "You can do it, Dad. I'll go with you if you want." He stepped onto the stage with his heart racing. He spoke about fear, transformation, loss, and rebirth. About how a boy and a woman who was no longer there managed to rescue him from himself. At the end, Lucas joined him. He hugged him tightly in front of hundreds of people. The applause was long, emotional, real. That same night, Andrew made a decision. He would open an institute in Hannah's name, a place to accompany adoption processes, support families, and offer refuge to children in situations of abandonment. He called it the Hannah de Vida Foundation. Lucas wanted to be part of it from day one. "I want to help other children like me so they can find their heart parents, like you." The foundation grew faster than expected. With the support of friends, specialists, and volunteers, they welcomed the first adopted child, thanks to the legal and emotional support of the team. Lucas received him at the entrance with a backpack full of used toys and a hug that seemed endless. "Now you're not alone. I'm not either." One peaceful night after a long day at the institute, Andrew walked by Lucas's room. He found him asleep, holding on to Hannah's photograph. Buddy was curled up next to him. He crouched down, kissed his forehead, and whispered with a choked voice, "You saved me, son. And Mom, she still lives in both of us." That same week, just when Andrew thought there were no more mysteries left in his story with Hannah, the first letter arrived. An envelope with no return address, no message, just a black and white photograph. In it, Hannah, much younger, sat on a bench, her hair loose and a serene smile on her face. Andrew didn't remember this image. It wasn't in any of their photo albums or digital folders. He thought it might be an old family photo, until more arrived. In the following days, the envelopes kept coming, each one with a different image. Hannah at a party with strangers, Hannah in a hospital, Hannah walking through a plaza Andrew didn't recognize, but one, in particular, sent a chill down his spine. A blurry, low-quality image where Hannah, wearing a loose robe and clearly pregnant, was walking down a hospital hallway. The date written on the back read October 1999. Andrew froze. Throughout their entire marriage, there had never been any mention of a pregnancy. Not a hint, not even a shadow of that past. Could she have hidden something like that from him? He took the photos to his lawyer's office. Together, they analyzed them in detail. They managed to trace the envelopes to a post office in Guadalajara. The sender's name was incomplete, just the initials ER. Without thinking too much, Andrew booked a flight to Guadalajara. He checked into a modest hotel and began contacting Hannah's old acquaintances. One former high school classmate, now working as a librarian at a local university, agreed to meet him. When Andrew showed her the photo of the pregnancy, she sighed. Yes, that was real. Hannah was 17. She got pregnant by a guy who disappeared. Her family sent her to live with some nuns to have the baby in secret. They gave it up for adoption. Andrew didn't know what to say. The ground felt like it was shifting beneath him. He sat in silence, staring at the coffee table. Had Hannah been a mother before she met him? And what if Lucas, the possibility, hit him like a cold wave? The resemblance, the letters, the inexplicable emotions. What if Lucas wasn't just a child of the heart, but also of blood? Back in Mexico City, his mind spinning, Andrew made a difficult decision. He requested a DNA test. In secret, he sent a hair sample from Lucas, along with an old brush of Hannah's he still kept. The following days were torture. Andrew kept up his usual routine, but every time he looked at Lucas, he felt a pang in his chest. How had he not seen it before? What if all this time, without knowing it, he had been part of a reunion between mother and son? Finally, the envelope arrived. Andrew opened it alone in his study, his hands trembling. It took a few seconds for him to process the key words of the document. 99.98% genetic match. Hannah Nelson, biological mother. He collapsed into the chair. He felt as though he couldn't breathe. The truth he never imagined hit him squarely. Hannah, his Hannah, had found her son without realizing it, and had loved him until the end. And him. How would he tell Lucas? Andrew didn't sleep that night. He walked around the house in silence, replaying 1,000 ways of telling Lucas the truth. None of them seemed right. His fear wasn't about the fact itself, but about what it might cause in the boy. What if it broke something? What if, by opening that truth, he lost everything they had worked so hard to build? At dawn, he called his therapist. He told her everything, every detail, from the photos to the test. She listened carefully, without interrupting. Finally, she spoke calmly. Andrew, this truth might be a gift. It's not a threat. Hannah lived with pain, yes, but that pain was never abandonment. It was love. If you handle this with sensitivity, it could strengthen your bond even more. Give Lucas the opportunity to close his own story. Andrew hung up with a strange feeling, a mixture of fear and hope. He took a deep breath and decided he would do it that same afternoon. He took Lucas to the park where they used to read together. He bought him an ice cream. They sat on their usual bench, and Andrew took his hands. Son, there's something important I need to tell you. Lucas looked at him attentively. He didn't seem scared, just curious. Andrew spoke directly but gently. Do you remember when we talked about how Hannah loved you with all her heart? Lucas nodded. Well, I discovered that she didn't just love you like a son. She was your mom, your real mom, your biological mom. The boy fell silent. He didn't say anything for several seconds. He looked at the ground, then up at the sky, as if searching for an explanation among the clouds. Finally, he asked in a soft voice, She really loved me, didn't she? Andrew felt his soul tear in two. With all she had, she searched for you relentlessly. And even though she didn't know at first, deep down, she always knew. That's why she stayed. That's why she fought. That's why she chose you, even if she didn't understand it all. She never stopped loving you, Lucas. The boy dropped his ice cream without realizing it. He jumped at Andrew and hugged him tightly, as though afraid that this truth too might disappear. I always felt her close, even if I didn't know why. I always felt she was mine. They cried together. It wasn't a dramatic scene, but a deeply human one, an emotional reunion that connected broken pieces that had been scattered for over a decade. The next day, they returned to the French cemetery. This time, Lucas carried a letter he had written himself. He read it aloud in front of the tombstone, while Andrew stood a few steps behind. "Mom, thank you for finding me. I'm sorry I didn't remember you, but now I know it was you. Thank you for taking care of me from where you are, and thank you for giving me Dad." When they finished, Andrew felt that something inside him finally clicked. It wasn't relief, it was peace. The kind of peace that comes when everything makes sense, even the pain. With the judge's consent and the lawyer's support, Andrew began the process to legally update Lucas's documents. This time, not just as his adopted son, but as Hannah's biological son. The judge, who already knew them well, agreed without hesitation. The new birth certificate was issued a week later. Hannah was officially listed as the mother, and Andrew as the adoptive father. But the truth, for them, didn't need any stamps. That night at home, they decided to celebrate. Lucas chose the menu: spaghetti with meatballs, chocolate cake and lemonade. Buddy, older but still strong, wore a party hat that kept shaking, causing the boy to laugh. "Today feels like Mom is here with us at the table," said Lucas, serving a slice of cake for Hannah's photo, which rested in the center of the dining table. Andrew raised his glass with tears in his eyes. "She's here, son, always." After dinner, while they were cleaning up the dishes, Lucas stood still, thinking. Then, with the tranquility of someone who has understood something profound, he said, "We were a broken piece. Now we're a complete puzzle." Andrew looked at him. He couldn't say anything. He just nodded, his heart full. As the months passed, the Hannah Bennett Institute began to gain national recognition. What had started as an intimate gesture to honor Hannah's memory became a space of real impact. Andrew, with the help of specialists, lawyers, volunteers, and donors, managed to create a comprehensive care model for adoption processes. The media began to speak about the Institute, and other foundations and companies offered to collaborate. Scholarships, support programs, and networks were created to strengthen the mission. One afternoon, while walking through the freshly painted halls of the Institute, Lucas proposed an idea that left Andrew with a lump in his throat. "What if we create a place just for babies? A little space where they can be safe. We could call it Mom's Space." Andrew looked at him silently for a moment, holding back his emotions. Then he nodded. "Let's do it. Together." And they did. They redesigned a wing of the Institute, filling it with cribs, soft carpets, dim lights, and instrumental music. Nurses, child psychologists, and volunteers were trained. The space became a reference model in neonatal care for abandoned babies. In the central garden, they placed a statue of Hannah sitting on a bench with a child in her arms. The artwork conveyed both tenderness and strength. At its base, a plaque read, "Here, no one will be invisible." During an event at the Institute with press, guests, and adoptive families, a woman approached Andrew. Her face looked familiar. She introduced herself as Deborah, one of the caregivers at the orphanage where Lucas spent his early years. After a long hug, she said something that left him paralyzed. Hannah knew Lucas was her son. She knew the moment she saw his eyes for the first time. She started the process to get him back, but she was already sick. She didn't have much time, and she didn't want to talk to you about it. She confessed it to me one rainy afternoon, crying. Andrew felt his chest tighten. Deborah continued. She said she didn't want to bring you any more pain, that she felt she had already failed you in other things, and that maybe there wouldn't be enough time to explain everything. That night, Andrew couldn't sleep, but he didn't feel resentment. He felt guilt, yes, but in a different way, not like before. This time, guilt turned into quiet determination. He got up, walked to the photo of Hannah in the living room, and whispered a promise. "I won't fail you. I'll take care of every child that comes here as if you were still here with me." Days later, Lucas was interviewed by a national TV channel. They were recording a special about emotional adoption, and the Institute's team suggested he speak about his experience. Sitting in front of the camera, with Buddy lying at his feet, Lucas spoke without hesitation. "Sometimes you don't get born into your family. Sometimes you find your family. You build it. My mom gave me life. My dad taught me how to live it. I'm a lucky kid." The video went viral in less than 24 hours. Social media praised him. Lucas was invited to events, schools, and campaigns. His face appeared on posters alongside the slogan, "Love is also adopting." Andrew watched from a distance, a mix of pride and awe filling him. Watching him speak with such confidence, with such light, was an unexpected gift. That night, while Lucas slept and Buddy snored at his feet, Andrew sat at his desk. He took a blank sheet of paper, grabbed his favorite pen, and wrote with steady handwriting, "Hannah, I don't know if you ever imagined this. I don't know if you can see us from where you are. But you did it. You brought us together. You saved 2 lives, and you united us forever. I love you, always." Years have passed. Lucas is now 12, taller than his age, with Hannah's intense eyes and the same smile he had when he was the little boy crying while hugging a photograph on a tombstone. He lives with Andrew, as always. Only now there are no more pending documents, no more hearings, no constant fears. There is life. A stable life with school duties, afternoons with Buddy, who is slower now but still loyal, and breakfasts where Andrew's coffee competes with Lucas's sugary cereal for center stage at the table. Every year, without fail, on October 26th, they repeat the same tradition. They visit Hannah's grave at the French cemetery. They bring yellow flowers, her favorite, and a handwritten letter. Lucas always writes one. He no longer needs Andrew's help with the writing. The night before, he sits with a lamp lit and writes in silence, with a concentration no one dares to interrupt. "It's for Mom. She still listens to me," he says, as though it's an indisputable fact. On each visit, Lucas sits in front of the tombstone, reads his letter aloud, and then remains silent for a long while, as though having a conversation with her in another language, one only they understand. Andrew watches him without interrupting, feeling that more than losing Hannah, life has somehow delivered her back to them in a different form. One day, Andrew received a publishing offer. They wanted him to write his story. At first, he declined. He said that everything had already been said with actions, with his work, with the Institute. But Lucas, sitting in the living room, looked up from the book he was reading and said, "Dad, the world needs to know. Not so they admire you, but so others will dare to love the way you loved me." That disarmed him. The book was written in the early mornings, with Hannah's photo on the desk and Lucas as the first reader. They called it "I Found You in the Silence." Upon release, it became a phenomenon. A bestseller in Mexico, translated into several Latin American countries. Not because of Andrew's fame, but because of the story. It spoke of real love, of losses that transform, of bonds that are born where they're least expected. In a television interview, Andrew summed it all up with one phrase: "My fortune is not money, it's my son. It's the love that remained when everything collapsed." Lucas, for his part, became the most beloved ambassador of the Hannah Bennett Institute. He visited orphanages, told his story to children still waiting for families, answered difficult questions with the maturity of someone who had lived many lives in a single childhood. He inspired other kids, but also adults. His testimony brought tears, yes, but also decisions. It was during one of these visits to the Institute that Andrew began to notice Anna, a psychologist specialized in child development. She wasn't young, nor was she trying to attract attention. But there was something about the way she spoke to the children that moved him. Little by little, they began to share talks, spontaneous coffees, and long walks through the Institute's garden. Lucas noticed it before Andrew did. "Mom would approve," he said one day with a half smile. "But I'll have to approve her too, okay?" Andrew laughed, surprised, and then ruffled his hair with tenderness. It was the first time he felt he could open his heart without betraying the past. One evening, on a quiet terrace, with Buddy lying under the table and the city lights twinkling in the distance, Andrew and Lucas shared a cup of hot chocolate. They didn't talk much. Sometimes silence was enough. "Son," Andrew said softly, "you are the reason for everything. I love you." Lucas looked at him without needing to say much. He nodded and replied with quiet assurance, "I love you too, Dad." 10 years had passed since the founding of the Hannah Bennett Institute. What was born from a loss, from an intimate story woven between pain and hope, had become a national symbol of transformation. More than 500 children adopted, dozens of families supported, new laws inspired by their working model. That night, the main hall of the Institute was decorated with soft lights, yellow flowers, photographs of Hannah at different moments in her life, and a mural filled with messages written by children and girls who, thanks to this place, now knew the meaning of home. Andrew remained discreet as always. He didn't like the spotlight, although he had become accustomed to it. Anna, now fully integrated into his life, was always by his side. Lucas, now 13, tall, charismatic, and full of a mature calmness, helped with everything, from organizing tables to comforting a young child who cried when they saw their photo on the adoption wall. During the ceremony, there was music, tributes, testimonies, and tight hugs. When the moment came, Andrew was invited on stage alongside Lucas. The applause was long. Many of the adopted children, now teenagers, rushed to hug them as if they were part of their own family. In a way, they were. But the surprise came afterward. Andrew took the microphone for just a moment. "Thank you for everything, but tonight we're not just celebrating a decade, we're also celebrating new beginnings." Then he walked off the stage, approached Anna, who was watching from a corner with a serene smile, knelt down in front of her and extended a small velvet blue box. "Anna, you came into my life without seeking the spotlight, but you became my peace. Will you marry me?" Anna covered her mouth with her hands, tears immediately filling her eyes. She didn't respond with words. She hugged him tightly. Lucas, a few meters away, looked at them with an expression between laughter and emotion, giving them a thumbs up. "About time, Dad," he shouted, making everyone laugh. The wedding was held a few weeks later in an intimate ceremony in the Institute's garden. Anna wore a simple dress with lace details. Lucas was the main groomsman, and Buddy, old but still strong, carried the rings in a small box tied to his back. There were tears, laughter, and a clear feeling that everything, after so much, had finally fallen into place. During the small party that followed the ceremony, Lucas asked for the microphone. No one was expecting it. "I want to say something," he said with assurance. "A long time ago, I was alone. I was scared. I didn't understand why things hurt so much. But one day, I found something I wasn't looking for. A family. In the silence of grief, I found a dad. And then I found an aunt who is now a mom at heart. Thank you for loving me like this, for choosing me, for showing me that love is built even when the beginning was broken. The silence that followed was profound. Then a thunderous applause filled the air. Andrew stood up, hugged him without saying anything. Anna did the same. Days later, while having breakfast together, Andrew spoke to Lucas about an idea that had been on his mind. What if we adopted someone else? There are so many children out there. Maybe we can do more for one of them. Lucas put his spoon aside and sat up straight in his chair. Really? Yes, yes. But I want to help with everything. I want to choose with you. I want to be a good brother, just like you were a good dad. And so began a new process. Visits to the DIF, interviews, forms, meetings. But this time, it wasn't just Andrew guiding. It was a united family making decisions together. Olivia arrived in their lives on a cold December morning, wrapped in a pink blanket, with a silent gaze that spoke more than any words. She was 3 years old, abandoned at a hospital in the city, with no name or history other than the note someone had left beside her. "Sorry, I can't care for her. Please take care of her." And from the moment Andrew held her in his arms and Lucas gently stroked her hair, the family knew she wasn't just any child. She was the last piece, the one they had been missing. The adaptation process was smooth, almost magical. Anna, with her background as a psychologist, guided each step with care. Andrew rediscovered the tenderness of the early years with Lucas, and Lucas became an older brother in such a natural way that no one taught him. He just was. He read her stories, helped her feed Buddy, explained who Hannah was. "She's Mom Hannah," he said one afternoon while they were drawing. "She's not here like we are, but she's here." And he pointed to his chest. "When we go to the cemetery, you can say things to her too, because now you're part of our promise." Olivia looked at him seriously for a moment, then nodded, as if she fully understood what that meant. The last visit of the year came with a clear sky and a gentle breeze. Andrew drove, while Anna softly sang to Olivia, who was asleep in the back seat. Lucas sat silently, holding a bouquet of yellow flowers on his lap. They didn't speak much. It was one of those afternoons when love didn't need to be said aloud. When they arrived at the French cemetery, they walked together. Andrew carried Olivia in his arms. Lucas held the flowers like they were a treasure. Anna walked beside him, one hand on Andrew's back, the other on Lucas's shoulder. Hannah's grave was waiting for them as always, clean, its white stone reflecting the sunlight. Andrew approached first. He placed Olivia on the ground, crouched in front of the tombstone, and ran his fingers over Hannah's name as he had done for so many years. He breathed deeply. Then, with a firm but soft voice, he said, "Hannah, you didn't die. You spread into every part of our new life. In Lucas, in this little girl who now smiles at us without knowing where she comes from, but feeling she's arrived where she was meant to. In Anna, in me, in every hug we give. Thank you for never letting us go." Lucas approached, crouched as well. He placed the flowers at the foot of the tombstone and, as always, touched the stone with his fingers. Then he closed his eyes. "I love you, Mom. And now, we'll never be apart." Olivia, shy but attentive, imitated her brother's gesture. She touched the tombstone with one small hand and said with difficulty but with clear intent, "Mom, Camilla." Anna looked at them with tears in her eyes. Andrew hugged them all. The silence surrounded them, but it wasn't empty. It was the silence of understanding, of a closed cycle, of love finding its purest form. That day, on the way home, Lucas wrote a new letter, not to leave at the tomb, but to keep in a box that he now shared with Olivia. "It's our story, Vale," he said to her. "And you're going to write it with me?"